nice, very nice.
Thank you. As I told Sarah, now my grandma's convinced I won't die in a
Oh no. No, it makes grand.
Are we going to get married anytime soon?
Okay. Just do it down here. Be done with it.
No, I want to try it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We went to 4 weddings last summer, and it was quite a bit. Oh wow.
They came about. They were really popular, but right up until the motion picture became, and that's what people do.
Yep.
And that was before people traveled. So people would look through. Right.
So what we're going to do is, let's do this. Better? Cool.
Actually, they got 2 friends of mine that put them out of business. One,
Sitting on that here.
when you go to a rock concert, he would have photos taken of you while you were there, and he would have like special rights with the band to be able to do it. He could cut. But would have been his smartphone no need for that. Right.
I was in charge of
Are you at 10 minutes to change everything?
Okay. Oh yeah. Totally change everything. Not happening. Not happening.
now that would be like so I got to check out the That's cool. I mean, we could still what'd you get to drink?
Anyway, your first drink up there, like,
oh.
But I don't get I don't know how to.
I mean, I learned how, but I don't remember. Probably, yeah, because, yeah.
So how's Michael doing? But it's,
Yeah, exactly.
Mike likes such.
Oh, yeah.
No, never. Like.
And I forgot to ask my kids about
Yeah, I'm
So Cassius, I'm the shortest one here.
You're always the shortest one. Why should that make you feel uncomfortable? I'm usually the tallest. Oh, you're in the front row.
Oh, this is good. I forgot this is the one I like.
That's better than finding out it's the one you didn't like.
It's true.
That's true, but I
Yeah.
This is the one with the
How have you been? Good. Just got back in town. I was visiting my brother and sister-in-law and their family. Didn't go out for Christmas, so I went out now. So it was a little warmer, not much, but quite a bit of sun. What's your name? I like this most of it. How warm is it? But it was in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. Well,
I think it's wonderful.
Well, yeah. I was getting tired at Christmas because we were going to the same parties. Yeah, since they become mine too, because I've been going out there for 30 years. But I wanted to.
I think this guy's like a dance. This kind of dance like soft and tap
I got
dance.
Christmas out there one year and I was in jam. Because really, this is where you want to get old because it gets old. Yeah, absolutely.
But if I got to
And then I've got a trip planned for the end of March, so Costa Rica. If it stays here for a long time, that'll be
He's talking about the ships.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Protesting the government.
Yeah. Well, I think they were having it in Brazil.
Brazil certainly, but I think
Brazil
Peru before Brazil.
And then I started,
Chile and Peru.
I love going up to Machu Picchu.
Oh yeah.
And once you enter up to Machu Picchu, you're close to the skies. You know?
it feels like.
Oh,
That's why I think I like it.
except the altitude. I felt pretty much when I got back to up on the cloud forest. It was too high for me.
The Cloud Forest.
Oh, how did you find out about you? Where were
Oh my goodness, I've always wanted to go there.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I've never been. I've always wanted to go. How recently did you go?
Oh, not recently, but she just mentioned that.
Oh, I was really. Did you been there? I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You guys overtook my I apologize. It was almost a beautiful.
Everybody else has been to Costa Rica already.
I have been to Costa Rica. Are you going? I only say not yet.
Okay.
Just waiting for the bar to join.
I want to hear more about Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu, what you know of the heavens.
Oh, that sounds just so wonderful.
It's one of those places that if you can get away from the crowd and just be there. I felt the same way at Uluru in Australia. There's things that are sacred places truly are.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Highways that were built for them by the federal government.
Well, and then you said get away from the crowds. You also get away from the clouds. I mean, it just feels like there's a mist that goes over Machu Picchu. Some of these places.
By far.
Oh, good. Oh, good. But you got the better picture.
Definitely in the cloud forest at Cusco, where we would go out in the morning to go birding. That was definitely.
Oh, you've been birding. Do you do any birding here in Chicago?
I'm not a good birder, so I'll come along for the walk and have them point out things.
And if they know what they're doing, I got you.
Are you a birder?
No, but I know there are some places here in like Michigan where you
Oh
can.
yeah, like Montrose, the bird center.
On Montrose, exactly. I've been out there. I've done that.
A very long story, deregulation of bankruptcies. Like, we're currently one half that of it.
That's a great bird, and that's the.
Oh, you must have a good camera because you've got to have the telephoto for all this. That's not one you can just take a snapshot of.
And I tell you that the one place that I went to, that Machu Picchu, that was spiritual.
Yeah, I really.
I don't know if
That's not moving to the water.
or a government, I don't remember.
It was a good vote.
Just make sure
Because
it's here.
people didn't live up there.
It was more of a ceremonial.
site of
That's
some
what I
sort.
thought it was ceremonial. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I heard you say that. That's absolutely.
And you're
John.
John.
That's okay. You are going to Costa Rica coming up?
I'm going to Costa Rica the end of March.
Okay.
But they know for sure.
Yeah, I remember that. It's been. I went in the 90s. So what does that make it? 20 years since I went. More than 20
I'm
years.
wondering if it's overdone now. If it's so set as a tourist destination that, okay, you are treading where thousands of other people have beforehand, and they're really, I'm hoping that we get there.
It strikes me that you, even if that were true, you'll find your. The fact that you're here, you'll find your own way. You'll find your own way. Yeah.
Well, I love travel. People who say, oh, why travel? I've got everything I need here. No, you just don't know yet.
I agree. But this feels to me like traveling in Chicago. To come to something like this.
Again, it's off the beaten path.
This is a travel in Chicago kind of thing. This is a travel in Chicago kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is she making you wait?
She's waiting for everyone to get their drinks for the
My name is John. Hi.
Walter.
Hey, Walter.
Nice to meet you, John.
Nice to meet you. I don't know if you met Oscar at the bar. He's not normally here.
Okay.
He's struggling, just keeping up with the drink orders.
Oh, sure, no worries.
So it's just going to take a little while.
Oh, yeah.
Once he gets him going, they'll have a very amiable crowd.
No big deal. I know I know how it is.
Well, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
This is a great topic.
Yeah, I've talked about the aviation and the railroads before, so I figured this just makes sense to cover
Perfect.
steamships.
Yeah, perfect combination. Perfect, yeah, perfect topic.
And I know Patty loves ships, so she would not have a problem with that.
The unfortunate thing, and I just mentioned to the ladies, the owner here, Virginia and Todd, have you met them?
Yeah.
They have a boat. They've got a 50-foot trawler out on the Great Lakes, but they're in Michigan right now. They're in Detroit.
Okay.
So they're probably watching you on
On the
this.
stream. Well, if not, I think it's recorded, so on
Or
Facebook you
recorded.
can always watch it
Yeah.
later.
I will be sending this to other people.
Awesome.
I appreciate you.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Thanks for
Hi,
coming.
get out of here. It's Sean. It's fine. I'm gonna awkwardly. Hayward, can you see me if I stand, or do I need to squat?
Yeah, that's.
I can stand. Okay. Tight.
Don't you?
Oh yeah. Could I borrow that?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you, kind sir. I'm gonna stall for time for a bit, so
What you gotta do?
I'll blather on a bit. Eat. Let me turn up. Testing. It worked earlier. Testing, testing. Aha!
What's wrong?
Yeah. Oops. Small technical difficulties. Here, will you hold this? I know, give me a minute, please. I see what this was plugged into now. It is not. 'Cause this, I know, it's running on battery power. Excuse me, ladies. No, you're fine, you're fine. Just gonna snake this right here. There we go.
There we go.
Whoop. Sorry. No, you guys are fine. Just
I
give me
play in a
second.
band. I know how to do these things.
Da, da, da. Perfect. Oh, we're good. We're good. We're good. We're good. Okay.
Feedback is the worst.
I know. I know.
Let's turn it down a skosh.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
All right.
I'm going to take this from you. Oh, so one thing we're going to have to do. I know it's kind of in the way, but try to keep the mic on this side of your leg.
This side?
Because the camera comes this way.
Oh, okay.
We good? Hey guys, welcome. Thank you guys for being here. Yeah. It's very nice of you to be here. My name is Patty. I am the founder and executive director of Chicago for Chicagoans. I'm quite excited to be here at our second lecture of 2023. Thank you guys for being here. I know I already said that, but I'm really stalling for time so people in the back can get their beverages. But truly, your support means so much to us. We are an all-volunteer organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. Everything that's produced is produced through a lot of hard work and love and free labor. So when we see people actually get excited for our events and come and sign up and be nice and remember their passwords and all of this different stuff, it means a lot to us because we put a lot of work into this, and it's nice to see it be appreciated, and it's nice to see people come out. And if you're tuning in online, hello. It's good to see you on the internet. Yeah, this is being streamed live, so if you have any crazy rants planned, try to do that after the talk.
Where did you get that?
But I also want to point out, if you're looking for lecture slides, we have a number of QR codes scattered around the room that you can scan, and then you can look at the slides on your phone, and you can zoom in and out if you want to. And then we also have some physical packets. Now, I am not trying to kill the entire Brazilian rainforest. So if there's not a packet in front of you, just ask your neighbor very nicely if you can take a look at theirs and share, because sharing is caring. And if you're tuning in online, there is a link in the comment and in the description of this video and in a million other places. So click on that link and find your slides. Okay, now that we've covered slides, I'm still stalling for time. I want to remind you guys again, we are an all-volunteer organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. All of our events are offered to the public on a pay-what-you-can basis. We're really passionate about that because we don't want to gatekeep history. We want everyone to be able to come and learn about the history of their own city. We are Chicago for Chicagoans, after all. So all of our events are offered, pay what you can. We suggest a donation of 10 to 20 bucks if you can afford it, more if you want to pay it forward, less if that's what you're comfortable with, or come for free if you're a college student and you're like eating ramen, that's fine. We're here for you too. So whatever your circumstances may be, we do depend on your donations to pay for our website and such things like that. So please feel free to make a donation. We accept cash, check, credit card, firstborn baby, Venmo, Google Pay, Square, whatever you got, we'll take it. So please see one of our lovely volunteers in the back, or make a donation on our website, chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate. I do want to say a very special thank you to our volunteers, Stephanie and Olivia. Woo! They come here every single week and open the door and say nice things to people and check their IDs and all that kind of stuff. So this event would be much, much, much harder without them, and I know that because 6 years ago, I used to do it all by myself. So this is our 6th annual series. It's pretty exciting to be here. I also want to give a very special shout out to our videographer who doesn't like to be publicly recognized, Hayward. He's streaming for all of you fun kids at home. And also, if you want to rewatch this lecture later, we always keep the recordings up on our website, so you can check that out. Okay, I think I've done a pretty good job of stalling for time. I've covered all the bases. The theme of our lecture series this year is Gone But Not Forgotten. We really wanted to focus in on all the things in Chicago you can't see anymore, but at one point were completely and integrally associated with the city of Chicago. So that is the theme that ties all of our lectures together this season. So with that, I'm very excited to have our good buddy Walter joining us tonight to talk about things that float. Okay, steamships on Lake Michigan specifically, but those ships got around. They weren't just in Lake Michigan. They didn't just come through Chicago, but they were very important to the history of our city. And he's going to talk about canals, and I'm a canal enthusiast, so I'm going to be there in the back probably hooting and hollering, and I encourage you to do the same. If you guys have questions, we will have a Q&A at the end. You can always ask questions in the Facebook comments if you're tuning in online. And without further ado, Walter, give it up for him. Give him a nice warm welcome.
All right.
Nice. Good timing.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Good. All right. Let me try to lean into this thing here. All right. Well, thank you, Patty and Chicago for Chicagoans, for having me back at Room 13 to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is transportation history. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and I just love these topics because this is the nerd. This is one of those times where I get to put on my engineering hat and also my amateur historian hat. Yeah, my name is Walter. I've been a tour guide and lecturer here for, I think, this is my 4th year now. So this is cool. I'm really glad I get to do these. So last year I gave a talk here about Chicago's role in the early history of aviation, and then the year before that was on Chicago's railroad history. So I figured to talk about Chicago's, or the iconic steamships of the Great Lakes would sort of complete the land, air, and sea trilogy of transportation. So I grew up in Cleveland, right near Lake Erie. We have the William G. Mather ore freighter dock there, which I visited. And over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to visit a number of maritime museums and museum ships around the Midwest that I've got to incorporate into this talk. And there's a couple of slides where I have some of my photos that I've taken and incorporated into there. So like Patty said, the theme of these talks is Gone But Not Forgotten. So I figured we'd quickly go through the different modes of transportation, right? Both for passenger and freights, where we are currently at in Chicago and the Great Lakes in general, versus what largely does not exist anymore, which is what the focus of this talk is going to be. So starting with land, we have trucks with their free right-of-way known as highways that were built for them by the federal government. And just about everyone travels by car these days between cities. And I have a neat little pie chart in the slides that shows sort of the breakdown. The trucking industry dominates 70% of all the freight in the United States. By air, of course, we have the airplane, since their invention by my Ohio boys, the Wright brothers, in 1903, which largely became the dominant mode of long-distance transportation for passengers when the airlines eclipsed the railroads around the 1950s. The airlines carry relatively little freight by weight, but 3% by dollar amount because they tend to carry the more high-value items. By rail, the railroads reached their peak in 1916 with 250,000 route miles worth of track spread amongst hundreds of rival companies for intercity passenger and freight service. There were also about 18,000 miles of electric interurban lines connecting the cities to the suburbs. All that changed when the airlines and the trucks took over after World War II. And a very long story of deregulation and bankruptcies later, which I do not have time to cover. We currently have 1/2 of that amount. There are currently 5 Class 1 railroads remaining in the United States. They operate about 140,000 miles of track, carrying about 2 billion tons of cargo per year, which is 16% by weight, only 3% by dollar, because they tend to carry the bulk commodities like coal and grain, which have higher weight but lower value. We have 1 intercity passenger rail remaining, and of course that would be Amtrak. 22 million riders last year. Moving to water. We have canals, we have rivers, we have the Great Lakes. Let's break all 3 of those down, shall we? So the Erie Canal kicked off the canal era in 1825. That was what first linked the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. The canal's heyday lasted up to about the 1870s. There was a number of canals that fanned out across the country. The Illinois-Michigan Canal, of course, here in Chicago. The 1870s is actually when the canals reached their peak tonnage, so it's not like the canal era only lasted for 20 years before the railroads showed up. They had their heyday for quite a long time. So the railroads surpassed them around that time, the 1870s. However, we still have canals today. We have the Sanitary and Ship Canal in Chicago. We have the St. Lawrence Seaway, built in 1959, which I know, not technically a canal, it's a series of locks and dams, but whatever. St. Lawrence Seaway, very important canal-like waterway. It hauls 50 million tons of cargo per year, half of which goes to or comes from international ports. So the intention of the Seaway was to transform the Great Lake ports, such as the Port of Chicago and the Calumet River, into international ports. That didn't really happen to that extent because the 7 locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway were matched to the size of the 8 locks on the Welland Canal in Canada, which bypasses Niagara Falls, which are 740 feet long. So by comparison, the locks on the Panama Canal are 1,000 feet long. So if you're a saltwater vessel entering the lakes, or the salties as they're called, they are limited to that size, whereas the large container vessels of today go through the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal to their final destination on the ocean ports. Moving on to the rivers, we have had steamboats on the river since 1807. Robert Fulton first developed the steam-powered riverboat on the Hudson River in 1807. Steamboats quickly displaced the ore boats on the inland rivers and made the Mississippi River the first major artery of commerce. Today's descendants of the steamboats from Mark Twain's era would be the river barges, and I have a neat little slide showing those compared with canals. They haul about 700 million tons of cargo per year, mostly the heaviest bulk items that cannot be transported literally any other way. We actually went camping last summer in Savannah, Illinois, which is very close to one of the 8 locks and dams that make up the Illinois waterway system. It was built in 1933 to make the Illinois River more navigable for 20th century river traffic, and it made it possible to finally connect the Mississippi River with the Port of Chicago by way of the Sanitary and Ship Canal itself, a marvel of engineering. I'm sure you know, but it was built in 1900. It reversed the flow of the Chicago River. It superseded the Illinois-Michigan Canal. And the Illinois waterway system, which is the 8 locks and dams, connects those 2 systems. Techniques used for the Sanitary and Ship Canal were actually applied to finish the Panama Canal 14 years later. So while we were camping there, I took a little bike trip over to check out the lock and dam, because I'm a huge nerd and I just thought that'd be cool. So what they actually do, as depicted in the picture there, is they actually lash 15 barges together into a 5x3 grid, and then those barely fit into the locks, which are 600 feet long, and then a smaller boat just pushes the barges down the river. So they're basically the modern 20th century descendants of the old canal boats on the Erie Canal from the 1820s. So, I mean, riverboat traffic, canal traffic's still alive and well in the United States. So, moving on to the lakes. Patty loves canals. Yeah, I do too. Just ran on the side, actually went to the Erie Canal as well this summer for a wedding. And I'm big.
Married in the canal?
No, we went to a wedding. We went to a wedding that was in upstate New York, and while we were there, I visited the Erie Canal, and I'm a big runner, so I did a 20-mile run on the Erie Canal. It was freaking awesome. So I have a little quote from the book, The Floating Palaces of the Great Lakes. It goes like this. There is a romanticism associated with the steamboat era in the Mississippi River that flows through the American consciousness. Be it the popularity of Mark Twain's literature or the grandeur of the Broadway musical Showboat, there's little doubt that steamboat Gothic conjures visions of antebellum riverboats and an elegant and relaxed form of travel. This romantic sentiment has not translated to an equally iconic steamboat era on the Great Lakes. Yet by every measure, steamboats that plied the lakes were the true passenger palaces of North America's maritime. Great Lakes vessels were more versatile and robust than riverboats, designed to operate on open waters as well as in river currents. Great Lakes shipyards laid claim to the largest and most luxurious vessels. Nowhere in the world was there a concentration of ships defining engineering advancement, customer satisfaction, and geographic opportunity as on the Great Lakes. So today's Lakers are still thriving and surviving today. They haul up 160 million tons per year, mostly iron ore and coal, which is 4% of all freight in the country. However, check out the efficiency. With 1 gallon of fuel, a Laker can move 1 ton of cargo 600 miles, which makes it the most fuel efficient and environmentally friendly way to move cargo to this day. A freight train, by comparison, can move 1 ton of freight 500 miles, so that's the second most efficient way to move things. So one boat or one freight train can take between 400 or 500 trucks off the road. So, if you want to help combat climate change, if you're serious about helping the environment, we want less trucks, we want more boats, we want more trains. So, I'm going to give you a sort of a survey of freight shipping on the Great Lakes, and then sort of pivot over and then focus more on the passenger ship side of things, because that is the one aspect of maritime history that is most definitely a thing of the past on the Great Lakes. So there's a long history of shipping on the Great Lakes, starting with the French voyageurs traveling by canoe, trading furs. Then we transitioned into the schooners of the 19th century. If you're not familiar with what a schooner is, that is a ship of sail that has 3 masts carrying triangular sails. And on the Great Lakes, that's what evolved to be the dominant sailing ship, as opposed to the square-rigged sailing ships of the ocean. And then the 20th century, we moved into the huge steam-powered freighters. Before the 20th century, ships of sail were manually unloaded on shore and repackaged for riverboats, canal boats, and trains. So the typical flow of goods would include things like grain coming in by canal boats on the Illinois-Michigan Canal. They would then dock in downtown Chicago. There's a picture from the 1850s of what downtown Chicago looked like at the time, very busy. They would dock in downtown Chicago into one of the city's many grain elevators. Then they would be typically gravity fed from there onto waiting lake ships. From the east would come manufactured goods, which would then be transferred to rail that would head south and west. So because of this intermodal exchange, to use the modern term, between different vessels was necessary, Chicago's harbor actually became the busiest port in the world by 1871. Busier than the next 6 combined. Busier than New York, London, New Orleans, all combined. In that 1 year alone, 1871, during this period, 12,000 ships carried 3 million tons of cargo passing through Chicago's harbor. And if you look at the picture, you can just see just how busy it was. You had ships of sail, you had steamships, you had canal boats, all lining the waterfronts, all lining the lakefront and lining Chicago's river at the time. As the size of lake ships increased in the 20th century, industrial shipping gradually shifted away from the Chicago River and further south to the Calumet River. So, at that point, downtown transitioned into more of a commercial hub under guys like Marshall Field and Potter Palmer, guys like that, rather than an industrial center. So the industrial kind of center of gravity moved south at that point. At this point, around 1900, ships made a big change. By 1900, we had a device called the Hewlett unloader, and I think I have a picture of that on the slide as well. It's like this big metal scoop that kind of looks like this. It reaches into the ship's cargo hold, scoops up material about 10 tons per minute, and then transfers it to where it's moving it to. What took a week to unload, it used to take a week to unload a ship, Now it took only 1 day because of the Hewlett unloaders. So prior to the invention, the Great Lakes transporters were largely called whaleback ships. I'm going to mention that again later. Whaleback ships had curved hulls, kind of like a torpedo or like a submarine. And the reason they were designed that way in the 1870s and 1880s is that before that, when waves would hit a ship broadside, the ship would start to list like this, back and forth. And it was thought that having a curved hull transitioning from vertical to horizontal would provide a more hydrodynamic way for waves to encounter a ship on the open water. So the new freighters of the 20th century now had huge cargo holds in the midships, in the middle of the ship, that could be filled directly by machine, which now made the whalebacks obsolete. The whalebacks were also kind of hard to see. Once they were fully loaded, they would sink all the way down to the curved part, so you could barely see them. So it was kind of dangerous. On slide 5, I believe, there's an image of a modern freighter being loaded from an iron ore dock, which is in Marquette, Michigan. Marquette, the UP of Michigan in general, is a huge iron ore area. That's where a lot of the iron originates from, to all the steel mills in the United States. And today, if you go there, it is still an active iron ore dock. I visited there. They bring in the iron ore by train. They dump it into these pockets, as they're called, and then the pockets then lower and dump the ore directly into these cargo holds. It's absolutely fascinating. And there's actually kind of an art to it, because you have to load the ship left to right and front to back in such a way that the ship doesn't tilt one way or the other. It's got to be loaded evenly. So it's quite amazing. So in 30 years from 1900, the length and capacity of freight ships doubled up to 600 feet long and 13,000 tons in capacity. Then came another advancement, the self-unloading ships. So self-unloaders use conveyor belts on the ship itself to unload its own cargo without the need for machinery that's on shore, which was a huge advantage because not every dock or facility had Hewlett unloaders. So it was much more of an advantage if the ship could unload itself. So in 1927, the Carl D. Bradley, one of the most famous freighters in the Great Lakes, became the first self-unloader to take the Queen of the Lakes title, which is the title that is given, sort of unofficial title, to the longest ship currently on the Great Lakes, 640 feet long. In the 1950s, engineers developed a new way to store iron ore. They would make these small concentrated pellets that are called taconite. Much easier to ship and unload with the self-unloaders. And with that, the Hewletts became obsolete. There used to be, I think, 75 Hewlett unloaders in the Midwest. There are now 4 remaining. 2 of them are in Cleveland, where I'm from, and the other 2 are in the Calumet River in Chicago. There are talks ongoing to find some way to preserve them at a museum, since they are just such an iconic part of many industrial riverfronts. Now, these things are just like huge, ugly, ungainly things, so I don't know where or how you could save them, but they're talking about possibly doing that. So probably the most famous Great Lakes freighter, I think you probably know, has to be the Edmund Fitzgerald. Yes, I have to mention that. So if you were raised in a certain era, you probably know the song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. If you do not know that song, after this, please go home and play it. It is an awesome song. It's basically like the national anthem of the Great Lakes, and certainly of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where the ship sank. So the ship famously sank in 1975 during a storm with all hands on deck. 29 crew members died. The cause of the sinking has never been conclusively proven. There's a whole cottage industry of books, articles, rival museums, you name it, espousing their theory of what happened. And I won't go into the details, but basically the ship, there was a storm. What we know for sure is that the ship was taking on water somehow, either because it grounded or the cargo hatch covers weren't bolted down properly. It split in 2, it sunk. Not one distress call was made, not one lifeboat was launched. Ultimately, they did recover one of the lifeboats. It's at the Valley Camp Ship Museum, which I've been to, at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. They also recovered some of the, the life preservers as well. But it's still a mystery to this day. They're not sure exactly what happened. So the Shipwreck Museum, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum up in Whitefish Point, Michigan, which I think Olivia has been to. Yeah, it's so cool. I have never been, but it's definitely on my bucket list. They recovered the bell from the Edmund Fitzgerald in the 1990s and restored it. It's the centerpiece of the museum now. Every year they invite the surviving family members to ring the bell 29 times, once for each crew member lost. It's very touching. They live stream it on their Facebook every year. I watch it every year, and they always have a band come to perform the song as well. So it's very cool. So moving up to the present day, earlier I mentioned the 15 locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway, plus the Welland Canal, that is currently used by international ships, the Salties, to get to the Great Lakes. So Salties and Lakers, yeah. Salties are the international ships, and the Lakers are the freshwater ships. A little back and forth, a little rivalry there. So the other lock that the ships on the upper Great Lakes have to traverse would be the Sioux Locks at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, which connects Lake Huron to Lake Superior, which I've also visited on my trip up to the UP back in 2020. There are 4 locks there, the largest of which is 1,200 feet long, and that's what limits the size of the lake vessels on the Great Lakes to this day. So the largest ships on the lakes today there's 13 of them. They're called the 1,000 footers because they're about 1,000 feet long. The largest of which is the Paul Tregurtha. The Paul Tregurtha currently holds the coveted title of Queen of the Lakes. That is the largest ship in the Great Lakes right now. So while I was up there at the Sioux Locks, I watched these ore freighters go through for about an hour. It was really awesome. Nerd. I heard that. I resemble that remark. It's operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, who they operate the locks. They also operate all the locks on the Illinois River and the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. And so I actually asked one of the staff walking by, if I were to paddle a kayak up to the locks, would they let me through? And he said, absolutely not. What you have to go through the locks is a boat with some sort of an engine and a marine radio. That's what you have to have. If you come up with a paddle boat, you have to go to the Canadian side because they're the ones that have a lock for those kind of boats. So they're like, go to Canada, we'll deal with you. We don't have time for kayaks. So that's the kind of quick and dirty survey of freight ships on the Great Lakes. So we still have freight ships. Okay, we still have the 13 1,000 footers. The Calumet River, Port Chicago, is still quite busy to this day. So that's really not gone and forgotten. So what about passengers traveling by ship in the Great Lakes? So there was once a time when there was a thriving steamboat industry in connection with the railroads carrying immigrants to Chicago and tourists to vacation destinations like Mackinac Island and Niagara Falls. This is the one mode of transport which has utterly vanished in the era of the car and the airplane. So the last passenger cruise on the Great Lakes was in 1967, believe it or not, when the SS South American made its last run delivering passengers to the 1967 World's Fair in Montreal. So I will return to that voyage at the end of this talk to sort of wrap things up. But today, there are some passenger vessels that remain. There are ferry services that can take you to various islands on the Great Lakes. For example, if you go to Mackinac Island, they ban cars there. You have to take a ferry. There's also car ferries. There's one that links Ludington, Michigan with Manitowoc, Wisconsin. It's operated by the SS Badger, which is actually the last coal-fired steamship operating on the Great Lakes. There is also, I believe, a high-speed catamaran that runs between Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Muskegon, Michigan. So that's just about it. They're basically glorified taxis. There's no style there. So I thought I would focus the rest of the talk on passenger steamships, so since that is most certainly lost but not forgotten. So we're going to start at the very beginning, on the east side of the Great Lakes of Lake Ontario, and then kind of make our way west and up the elevation along the Great Lakes to Chicago, since that was sort of the progression of steamships. So I'll just mention that I'm going to mention one sailing ship, but I'm going to focus mainly on the steamships. So just sort of a technical aside here about what the difference is. A ship of sail, of course, uses only wind to power it, whereas a steamship uses a steam engine, possibly along with sails, to power it. So the power of the expansion of water into steam has been known since antiquity. The first steam engines were invented in England by Thomas Newcomen and James Watt in the 1700s. That's where the term watt comes from. If you have like a 100-watt light bulb, that's James Watt. It's the unit of power that we use today. They were used at the time to pump water out of mines. The early 19th century saw these huge steamships shrink in size to the point where they could be used to power ships first and then locomotives second. Steam engines are powered by some sort of fuel, initially wood and then coal and then lastly oil, which you would then burn. You would boil the water into steam, and then that would then push one or more pistons to turn a paddle wheel or later a propeller. Okay, so that's the power system that we're talking about here. So I'm going to start off with a couple stories that involve a little bit of controversy. So sailing ships have sailed the lake since 1679. René Robert Cavalier de La Salle, I'm sure I butchered the heck out of that name. We're just going to call him La Salle from now He's the first European explorer of the Mississippi River. He built a 40-foot sailing ship called Le Griffon, or the Griffin, and set sail from the Niagara River to Lake Michigan to establish fur trading with the local tribes here. Now Marquette and Joliet, we know, one of the first explorers here, they did precede him in 1673 on their voyage through Chicago, but LaSalle was the first to explore the Mississippi all the way down to its mouth. On the return trip to Niagara, the ship was sunk, probably by a storm. Now, the wreck has never been conclusively found, which makes it sort of the holy grail for shipwreck divers. Now, every year, it seems a diver claims they found the Griffin, and then museum directors have to jump up and say, it's not the Griffin, you know, the timbers are not right, or it's 19th century construction or something. But, I mean, there's an article from this pair of divers from like 2 years ago that says, we swear to God this is the Griffin. And then the director of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum said, there's no way. So it's still, the jury's still out there whether they found it or not. But just a PSA, in case you ever get into shipwreck diving as sort of like a fun little hobby, if you find the Griffin, you will become a god amongst men, right, in the maritime world, because it's just the holy grail. There's been something like approximately 6,000 shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, but that's the one that people seem to really want to find. Controversy number 2. What was the first steamship on the Great Lakes? A little bit of controversy here. So Robert Fulton, who I mentioned earlier, and his partner Robert Livingstone had attained a monopoly on steamboat rights in New York by 1815. So any steamboat company in the United States side of the lakes had to pay a license fee to use their technology for the next 20 years. That monopoly existed until the Supreme Court broke it up in 1824. So arguably, if you are proudly Canadian, the first steamboat in the water was a Canadian ship called the Frontenac. It was launched on September 7th, 1816 in Kingston, Ontario, which is located on the eastern end of Lake Ontario, right by the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. However, it was launched without its machinery, so it traveled by sail on its maiden voyage. So it would not travel under its own steam until May 23rd of the next year. However, the American vessel, Ontario, had already launched 9 days before that, which makes it the first vessel not propelled by sail to travel in the lakes. So, go USA. USA. Yeah. But it's funny, the book I read was like, I think the author's Canadian because he's like, unfortunately, the Ontario's first, not the Frontenac. So, the Ontario, being the first, ran a regular route on its namesake lake only because of the somewhat formidable obstacle of Niagara Falls. The Welland Canal that was built to bypass it would not be built until 1829. So first-class passage, to give you an idea of the cost of what it would cost to travel by boat in those days, was $15 for a full round trip of Lake Ontario, which is about $330 today. Okay, first class, yeah, not cheap, but not affordable-ish. Steerage passengers would pay half of that. Round trip took about 10 days. Okay, so I mean that sounds like a lot. It seems like a long time, but a lot more comfortable than stagecoach, because there just were no roads at the time. So moving west above Niagara Falls, the first steamship on the upper lakes was called the Walk in the Water on Lake Erie. I think I got a picture of that in the slide right next to the Ontario. Not sure what slide. So with the coming of the Erie Canal in 1825, connecting Albany and the Hudson River to Buffalo and Lake Erie, there was a huge incentive to have steamboat service available at the canal terminus at Buffalo, running to the only other large city in the upper lakes at the time, which was Detroit, stopping at the towns along the Ohio shore. So the fare one way from Buffalo to Detroit on the Walk in the Water was $18, averaging about 4 miles per hour into the wind heading west and about 8 miles per hour downwind and heading back east. So remember, at the time, there was no railroad heading west. And when Cornelius Vanderbilt's New York Central eventually did build or acquire lines to connect New York with Chicago, rail passage was just far less comfortable than by ship, or certainly by road, which gave ships a distinct advantage initially. The ship also scheduled trips up to the Straits of Mackinac, which, here's a quote, will undoubtedly attract a considerable number of passengers whose curiosity will be gratified by the splendid scenery of these inland seas. So this kind of publicity set the tone for steamboat vacations for many years to come. So thus, by the end of 1818, there were 3 steamships on the Great Lakes. So steam was more powerful than sail, but sailing vessels still continued to dominate the lakes until the end of the 19th century. Why is this? So safety was one issue. By 1847, 4,000 people had died in steamboat accidents. Yeah. Reliability was another issue. Early steam engines failed often enough that the early steamers carried sail just in case. So if you look at the Ontario and the Walken water, they're sort of a hybrid. It's got sail and steams because it's like we have this newfangled steam engine, but just in case, we've got sail. We know how to operate those. And then there was the cost. Steamboat would cost about $75,000 at the time. Your traditional schooner would cost $10,000. Wood and coal cost money. Wind was free. So the schooners persisted for a long time. The last one was actually launched in 1889, and ships of sail continued to sail in the Great Lakes into the 1930s. So despite the risks with the newfangled steam technology, within 5 years there were 9 steamers operating on the lakes. By 1836 there were 45 steamboats in the upper lakes, and within 3 years later after that the number was 61. So I find this a particularly fascinating era, the 1830s to the 1860s-ish, because at that time all 3 modes of transport, canal, ship, and railroad, were roughly on par with each other. The cost per voyage between Buffalo and Detroit would have been about $800 in today's money, or about $1 per mile, which was the same as the railroads. The rates that steamships charged for freight was about 2 cents per ton per mile, which was lower than that by rail or canal. So you had options at the time. So this brings us to the era of the palace steamer. So palace steamer refers to the largest and the most opulent of the side wheel or the stern wheel passenger steamers beginning around the 1840s. Just to give you an idea of the increase in size of this time, the SS Empire launched in 1844, which was arguably the first palace steamer of its class. Rivaled any ship in the world, 250 feet long and 1,100 tons of capacity with 30-foot diameter paddle wheels. So this is roughly double the size of the very first steamships. And around this time, several changes took place. Boats got bigger. They quickly reached the technological limit of the strength that wood could provide, and propellers were introduced. So the propeller is a pretty cool story. It was invented by John Ericsson. So John Ericsson also developed the Monitor, and if you don't know what that is, the Monitor was the very first ironclad warship built for the U.S. Navy. So you might have heard the Monitor versus the Merrimack during the Civil War. That was the first the first battle between ironclad warships in the Civil War. So John Ericsson was the designer of the Monitor, and also the inventor of the nautical screw, or the propeller. The key problem with pedal wheels that propellers resolved was that if the ship was rolling in heavy seas, which happens all the time in the Great Lakes, what would happen is one wheel would come clear of the water and not do anything, and then the other wheel would be submerged right up to its hub. So you'd be transferring the load, the engine's load, just really violently from one wheel to the other, which would just cause failures. So by 1870, most steamships had converted over to propeller, which, being more efficient, drove the rates down. So at that time, fares fell by half. So a ticket from Buffalo, Chicago would have been $20. Now it costs $10, which is about $380 today. Steerage, again, about half of that. So the difference between first class and steerage at this time. So if you weren't wealthy enough to afford a first class cabin on these ships, if you were steerage, you would actually be assigned a plot on the deck for your belongings. So if you could just picture, like at the deck, all these immigrants, bring all the worldly possessions that they know, herding into like a square plot on the surface of the ship, just exposed to the elements. That's just how it was. Common areas used for there were common areas used for dining, which evolved into specialized accommodations for men and women separately. The ladies' salons were located aft, which is where the ship was more stable, and the men's salon would have been below the pilot house in the bow. It's presumably less stable, because smoking cigars, drinking brandy, how stable does it need to be, right? Perhaps the most storied of the palace steamers was the Lady Elgin. I think it's pictured on slide 8. The Lady Elgin was launched in 1851 by the shipbuilders Bidwell and Banta out of Buffalo, New York. Bidwell and Banta just made a ton of steamships at the time. It was rated as a favorite with the public on its runs between Buffalo and Chicago. So it was known for being involved in many accidents, but the last accident would occur on September 8th, 1860. So it was returning from Chicago to Milwaukee, where the ship was struck by the schooner Augusta near Winnetka, just north of here, damaging the ship beyond repair, which then sank rapidly. Most of the people on board had attended a pro-union rally with the Civil War looming, so they were all asleep, possibly drunk. Unfortunately, 302 passengers, a crew of 398 died, which remains the worst loss of life on the Great Lakes to this day. So one, well, not happy, but one sort of heroic part of the story is that Northwestern students saw this taking place just off the shore of Lake Michigan. His name was Edward Spencer, and he was credited with rescuing 17 passengers over the course of 6 hours. So he just swam out and back multiple times until he just collapsed from exhaustion. So there's a plaque in his honor located at the Northwestern Library to this day. So the disaster of the Lady Elgin made it very clear that there was an increased need for navigational regulation in the Great Lakes and led to an increase in federal spending for things like lighthouses and life-saving facilities in Lake Michigan, which are all run by the Coast Guard today. So a number of these palace steamers were built for the railroads, such as the Michigan Central, since they would essentially operate as extensions of the railroad. So the Michigan Central in particular ran from Detroit to its terminus in New Buffalo, Michigan. That's as far as it went. And from that point, you would then travel by steamer on to Chicago. So the Western World was one such ship, which looks very similar to the Lady Elgin. So if you want to envision it, just picture the Lady Elgin, but bigger. That became the new Queen of the Lakes when it was launched in 1854, which would not be surpassed for 40 years. 1893 was the next time a bigger ship was built. So the cost of the Great Western was $250,000, which was almost the same as the bid to build London's Crystal Palace the same year for the 1851 World's Fair. Extremely expensive ship. In the days before the Pullman rail cars, pull-down bunks were standard on steamers capable of housing 500 guests. All 127 staterooms had a marble slab washstand. They all had water gravity fed from tanks. Other improvements for safety at this time included watertight bulkheads, life preservers for each passenger, and, where was I? Could carry up to 2,500 tons of cargo, further boosting profits. So the palace steamer era is kind of like the golden era of ships in the Great Lakes. This would come to an end in 1857. We had a huge Great Depression that year, kind of like they were called panics at the time, the Panic of 1857, which caused the collapse of many railroads which owned these steamship lines. So moving on to the post-Civil War era, one man came to create a steamship company that would come to dominate the Lake Michigan. His name was Albert Goodrich. He is no relation to the man who founded the rubber company. He formed the Goodrich Steamboat Line and acquired a number of shallow draft ships to serve the small ports along Wisconsin's shore. So the railroads were expanding at this time. They finally reached Chicago from Detroit in the 1850s, which forced the steamship companies to get creative, because now at this point you could just take a train the whole way. So he saw a need in Wisconsin, where the railroads did not yet exist, for low-cost, rapid steamship service. So he advertised a new overnight service run between Manitowoc and Chicago, offering cheaper fares than the railroads, which were just coming in at the time. So as before, there was money to be made in partnering with the railroads. So in 1876, Goodrich contracted to carry all the freight from the Pere Marquette Railroad at Ludington, Michigan. Termed break bulk freight, the freight would be taken from the rail cars and then repackaged onto vessels for the trip across the lake. So as you can imagine, this is obviously very time-consuming and inefficient, and this would be fixed in 1892 with the introduction of rail ferries. So the company grew. At its peak, they ran 7 steamers on 4 routes daily. In 1890, the firm Berger & Berger constructed the 200-foot steamer City of Racine and Indiana, which ran the popular Milwaukee to Chicago overnight run for Goodrich for many, many years. So Goodrich exhibited ships at the Columbian Exposition in 1893 in Chicago, and even had a ship called the Virginia built to show at the fair, shown on slide 9, I believe. So the Virginia was a twin screw vessel with an ocean liner profile with an enclosed main deck. It was 285 feet long, 2,000 tons of capacity. It was hailed as the most elegantly appointed passenger vessel afloat. It also actually became a saltwater yacht later for the chewing gum millionaire William Wrigley, of Wrigley Field fame. Yes, let's just imagine being so rich that I'm just going to buy the fanciest boat at the time and just convert it to my private yacht. That's what he did. After the World's Fair, the company's reputation was so solid that they were able to purchase the whaleback ship Christopher Columbus, also pictured there, which became their most celebrated vessel. So, like I mentioned before, a whaleback ship refers to a hull design that curves from the vertical to horizontal on the top with only the curved part exposed when it's fully loaded. So that particular ship was built in 1892, actually specifically for the World's Fair. It provided sightseeing rides from Chicago to the World's Fair at the time. When it was built, it was the largest whaleback style ship ever at the time, and it was the only one built for passenger use. So, like I said before the modern century freighters, the whalebacks were basically only used for freight, with the exception of this one. So the Columbus trip, the Christopher Columbus trip between Chicago and Milwaukee became sort of a sightseeing staple for both cities, and the ship was often filled with just thousands of day trippers. Slide 10 shows an ad that was used at the time to advertise that service. A day trip, if you can see on there, from Milwaukee and back cost $1.50, which is $50 today. So just a quick show of hands, like who would you pay $50 to be ferried, in style mind you, for a day trip to Milwaukee and back?
No.
Yes? No? There's no wrong answer. You can say no. Okay. Roughly half? Okay. Absolutely.
There was dancing as well.
There was dancing. There was music.
We could have been dancing. We could have been dining.
You know,
We could put it on the metropolis of Milwaukee.
so
With refined
they should bring this back.
attractions.
Yes. Okay, so there's a demand. So it took about a day. One day or overnight. So fast, no. Affordable, yes. But you had as compared to the railroads, you're kind of cramped in one particular seat. On the ship, you can move around. There was entertainment. Absolutely. So, all right, good. There's demand for such things. Nope.
B-list movie stars and Julie
Oh, yeah.
McCoy.
Yes.
Just a quick question.
Mhm.
It says daily 10 a.m. Chicago time.
Right. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I believe it says 10 a.m. Chicago time on the ad because standard time was not a thing until the railroads invented them. So I'm not sure. I forget the exact year that the time zones were created, but it was basically a big railroad convention met in Chicago and decided on standard time. Before that, each town had their own. They measured their own local noon by literally, noon was when the sun was overhead. So before standard time, it was kind of a nightmare to convert times. Every city has its own time zone essentially. So.
But I would think Milwaukee and Chicago would be the same.
So before time zones, Milwaukee and Chicago were probably on different times. So, all right. So moving on to the 20th century, the two challengers to the steamship would emerge in the 20th century. You had the first commercial truck in 1902, the first aircraft in 1903, and the Ford Model T in 1908. So despite this, the first 15 years of the 20th century saw a fleet of new ships launched on the lakes. From a propulsion standpoint, engineers began introducing diesel engines, and by 1913 there were now 4 freighters on the lakes using this type of direct propulsion. This gradually became the norm, replacing the old coal-fired boilers. The most important safety technology introduced to the maritime world this time was wireless telegraphy, so radio. So radio signals allowed vessels to receive weather and hazard information instantly. By 1909, every boat of the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company carried wireless telegraph stations, as did Goodrich's ships. So the new ocean liners of the 20th century, such as the Lusitania from 1907 and the Titanic, raised expectations for luxury that passengers came to expect on cruise ships, catering to the growing tourism industry. So the new class of palace steamers at this time reflected this to compete with the ocean liners. You had ships like the City of Cleveland from 1907, which at 400 feet long was among the largest vessels built for lake service only. It was surpassed by the City of Detroit 3, built by the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company. And there was also the C&B, so SEAC, like C and B, for the rival Cleveland and Buffalo Transit Company. So it was named after the company's initials, C and B. Yes. The City of Detroit 3 I have shown on slide 11. Very Titanic-like in its appearance. So I'm just going to sort of describe the interior of the City of Detroit 3 in a little more detail. The next slide, I think I have a couple pictures of the interior. Because if you think only ships like the Titanic and the Mauritania and the Lusitania had opulence, you would be sorely mistaken.
You're just kidding yourself.
Yeah. So the ship was designed by a guy named Frank Kirby. Frank Kirby is probably the most important naval architect ever. He was also the father of modern ice-breaking technology. And he was actually appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt to revise standards for construction and operation of steamboats throughout the United States. So put simply, in the maritime world, Kirby was a very big deal. The D3, as the City of Detroit 3 was known, cost $1.5 million to build, which is about $32 million today. It was a 5-story floating fortress. It had a 470-foot-long steel hull. It had the largest side wheel paddle wheel at the time at 30 feet in diameter. For perspective, the size of the ship, if you did 6 laps around the deck, that would total a mile. The Marine Review lauded the D3 in 1912, describing its 8,000 horsepower engines in detail, the complete fire alarm system that protected the passengers, its speed of 22 miles per hour, and above all, the stunning elegance that held its own against any landlocked hotel of the day. For overnight trips between Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo, there were staterooms available. There were 25 parlor staterooms, each with its own bathroom and veranda. It was trimmed in local hardwood, equipped with state-of-the-art electric fans and lights. So it was absolutely first-class accommodation by any standard. So picture there I have what was called the Gothic Room. So the Gothic Room was the men's smoking lounge on the upper deck. As the name implies, it was in the Gothic style. It featured graceful arches of English oak throughout. At the center was a large 5-paneled Tiffany stained glass window and a pipe organ. Yeah. It was heralded as the most beautiful room ever to be installed in any ship. In the Grand Salon, also pictured there, passengers were wowed by 7 large mythology-themed murals on the ceiling and a large painting on each of the 2 staircase landings. The painter was noted muralist William de Leftwich Dodge of New York. If you go to the Library of Congress, his paintings are still located there. I found a quote from one patron at the time. The D&C steamers were absolutely works of art. They were a delight to travel on, a very comfortable way to travel, and absolutely beautiful. When I first saw them, I was amazed that man could build such beautiful, colossal machines. I just thought it was a cool quote. Unfortunately, the ship was eventually scrapped in 1956. But fortunately, the Gothic Room was preserved, and it was actually stored in a barn near Cleveland, Ohio for decades before it was saved and installed at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum in Detroit. So it has been saved, and that museum is most definitely on my bucket list. Yeah. So bringing things back to Chicago, I would be remiss if I did not mention the elephant in the room when it comes to passenger vessels in Chicago, because the most infamous one must be the Eastland. Slide 13. So a little bit of backstory on the SS Eastland. Of course, we had the sinking of Titanic here in 1912. The next year, there was a huge storm in the Great Lakes in November of 1913 that actually sunk a dozen freighters in the Great Lakes. I believe it was that same storm that also took out the Ohio and Erie Canal, that stretch from Cleveland to Akron, that took out that canal as well. So it's a very sort of a back-to-back 1-2 punch for safety in the Great Lakes at the time with these 2 incidents. So this brought renewed attention to safety regulations. Flash forward to July 24th, 1915. The Eastland had sailed for many seasons, bringing mostly tourists to towns in southwest Michigan and returning from fruit to sell in Chicago. Southwest Michigan, if you don't know, is very, very famous for its fruit. On this particular trip, the Eastland was chartered from the St. Joseph Chicago Steamship Company to ferry workers from the Western Electric Company to a company outing in St. Joseph, Michigan. So as the dock lines were cut off with hundreds of family and friends watching from the shore of the Chicago River near Clark Street, the ship just suddenly rolled over from the dock onto its port side and sank. Ultimately, 844 lives were lost, more than any maritime disaster in the Great Lakes, more passengers than on the Titanic, and more than during the 1871 Chicago fire. So more people died in the Titanic, but more passengers died in the Eastland because the Titanic had a much larger crew than the Eastland did. So such an event was completely unprecedented. This has just never happened before. A ship sinking, just listing over 20 feet from the shore in 20 feet of water on a calm river. But there were red flags. So the Eastland was known to be a top-heavy ship and tended to list easily despite using, they would use ballast tanks to stabilize the ship. The ship was leased to Lake Erie routes for a few seasons, going to Cedar Point and back to Cleveland, before returning back to Chicago for service. So prior to 1915, what they did was they added several tons of cement to the upper deck for fireproofing. Then they added additional lifeboats weighing several tons in response to governmental regulations passed in the wake of the Titanic sinking. So this trip was the first since all of these refittings. So I know it's kind of ironic. The Titanic sank, and now there has to be enough lifeboats for everybody. So now the Eastland has enough lifeboats for everybody onto its already unstable upper deck. So the sinking of the Eastland basically stopped excursion and vacation travel on the Great Lakes for a while. So steamship companies struggled to regain the public's confidence naturally. The carriers to the east, however, had an easier time of this. So at this time you had the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company and the Cleveland and Buffalo lines. Their ships were relatively new sidewheelers, which were noted for their stability. The St. Joseph Chicago Steamship Company, for what it's worth, closed after the season and disbanded. So I think one reason this particular incident is not as well remembered as compared to, say, the Lusitania or the Titanic or the Edmund Fitzgerald is that because in these three cases respectively, the Lusitania sinking basically directly led to the United States entering World War I. The Titanic had a lot of famous people on it, whereas the Eastland's passengers were mostly working-class Czech people. Okay, they weren't famous. And the Edmund Fitzgerald has a famous song written about it, that people love. So, I don't know, perhaps we need a song about the Eastland, and then it'll become as famous. All right, so we will end our tour of the passenger steamship era on the lakes on a higher note with the last company to schedule overnight cruises, which was the Chicago, Duluth, and Georgian Bay Transit Company, which began operations in Chicago in 1912. So that's the last couple slides there, some pictures of that. The Georgian Bay Line, as the company was called, built two sister ships called the North American and the South American. Both were propeller ships with 5 decks. They ran week-long adventures from Buffalo to Chicago and from Buffalo to Duluth, Minnesota, respectively. Unlike every other grand steamer at the time that burned coal, these ships actually had oil-fired boilers, and so they emitted no smoke and no cinders. So since it was a much cleaner ship without all the soot, the focus at this time was completely on the guest comfort. So the overnight trips to summer destinations like Mackinac Island featured entertainment. You had music recitals, dances, musical reviews. So steamship lines after this point started to struggle in the 1920s and 30s. They began losing passengers to interurban trains, which were themselves only a few years from extinction. So it's interesting to note that many of these passenger boats went out of commission during the Roaring 20s when the economy was actually good. And why? Ford Model T. Ford Model T was just everywhere at this time. Everyone had to have their own car. If you've seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, comes to mind. The scene where Brooks goes, I saw an automobile once when I was a kid, but now they're everywhere. The world just went and got itself into a big damn hurry. So only the most attractive cruise routes survived beyond the 1930s for those who weren't in such a hurry to get to their destination. So I actually had the opportunity to visit the National Museum of the Great Lakes in Toledo, Ohio, and they have some very cool memorabilia there, including memorabilia from the very last voyage of the South American in 1967, as I mentioned earlier. So I included some of my photos that I took of that memorabilia on the last slide. It shows that they made their own china, depicting cruising in style in the Great Lakes, and they even had the menu from that day. So I'm actually kind of a sucker for vintage menus. I think they're really cool because it provides such a window, like a cool window into an earlier era with whatever dishes just happen to be popular at the time. So with that, we'll bid bon voyage to the era of the passenger steamship. All right. I'm going to take a sip of my Manhattan now.
Yes. You've earned it.
Are there any questions? Yes.
You talked about the 13-1000s that are still operating on Lake Michigan right now. What do they carry?
So, should I repeat the question?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, of the 13 1,000 foot, 1 foot freighters that still exist on the Great Lakes today, what do they mostly carry? Number 1 is iron ore. Number 2 is coal. I think number 3 is limestone.
Yep.
So those 3 are the lion's share of what they carry.
Huh.
So largely you pick up iron ore from the UP of Michigan or Duluth, Minnesota, and then they're transported to the steel mills.
And what did they carry in 1902?
Back in 1902, the same, iron ore, coal. It really hasn't changed much.
It really has.
Yep. And that's as big as those ships will ever get until they decide to make the locks bigger. Yep. Yep.
Walter, I moved here 35 years ago. I feel like I remember looking out at Lake Michigan and seeing, ships go by every once in a while. I don't feel like I see that anymore. Am I right or am I wrong? not see the ships go by anymore?
So
We
the
see
question,
less?
right? So the question was, we don't perhaps see ships as often as we used to on Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
If you go to the Calumet River Harbor, it is still pretty active. And last night, I did a little bike trip down there last summer, and I kind of hung out the harbor for a little bit. And if you look out towards the lake, I saw a North Warrior that particular day. So they are there, they do exist. Coming to Chicago, most definitely not. You know, the Chicago River is obviously not really used for industrial shipping anymore, but the Calumet River still very busy. Gary, Indiana, still very busy for shipping. So I think you just have to be in the right place at the right time. Yeah.
Good question.
Do you see any scenario where cruise ships might come back for with more efficient engines that could be weekend excursions, not
Sure.
take a whole week to do things?
Sure. So the question was, will cruise ships ever come back with more modern, efficient engines? It would have to be a situation where you are willing to pay more than you would pay in gasoline for a car and take longer to do it to get somewhere. So the question is the increase in luxury or having the room to roam around on the deck and not have to drive yourself worth it? I don't know. I mean, like I said, there are passenger ferries that exist today, and
Well, passenger ferry and luxury ship are
right, very different things. Very, very different things. I don't see it coming back, to be honest with you, anytime soon. But who knows? You know, there's all kinds of advancement in propulsion. So we could have much more efficient and cheaper electric motors in the future that could power such things. That could drive the cost down. So we shall see. Yeah.
Got a question in the way back.
Kind of similarly, how would you compare these luxury passenger boats to like a luxury cruise today, like a holiday cruise you would take like down to Alaska or something like that?
Right. So comparing luxury cruises back then with a cruise ship now. That's a good question.
Less woodwork.
Right. I think it's just a question of style and taste. You know, I think back then people really had a different sense of style. Like people valued things like hand-carved woodwork and a pipe organ and smoking rooms. You know, things like that wouldn't necessarily be as valued to today.
Now we have the cool water slide.
Right. Now there's water slides and then DJs and stuff like that. So it's a question of of style and taste. Right. So certainly fancier back then to compare to with today. I mean. But I mean, the idea was to provide luxury and entertainment and comfort, whatever that meant. And so I think we still have those today. It's just a different style. Yeah. Yep.
On one of your slides, you showed like a canoe of Native Americans going by.
Yes.
You know, a big ship. When did Native people like become less of a presence on the lake?
Question was, when did Native people and canoers become less of a presence on the lake, referring to the slide from the Griffin with the Native American paddler right next to it. Well, the
Smallpox
Let me think about
blankets
that.
did a number.
right. I mean, that's a long, complicated history of the gradual eviction of the Native peoples, unfortunately, from the area here. I mean,
1830s.
canoes were used all the way up until, I mean, goodness, probably the mid 18th century. So you would still have, fur. The fur trade was huge all the way until 1800 or so. So and those were traditionally transported by canoe by the French voyageurs of the time. Native peoples, it's a gradual, long and sad story of them being gradually evicted from the Great Lakes and Midwest in general. In Chicago, the Treaty of 1833, I think, was what finally removed the Potawatomi west of the Mississippi River. So certainly by that point, you would not have native paddlers on the lakes anymore. So yeah. So
I saw a question. Do you have a question?
yeah, you had a question over there?
Yeah, similar to the Pullman being in the train cars being synonymous with top quality. Was there a manufacturer or architect of steamboats at the time, like Pullman?
Right. So George Pullman, for whom the Pullman neighborhood is named after, and the Pullman factory was the dominant manufacturer of the Palace cars for rails. The question was there a comparable company for the steamships with their comparable accommodations? So Frank Kirby, who I mentioned earlier, who built the City of Detroit 3, was the premier individual naval architect at the time. So the Detroit and Cleveland Navigation Company, they relied very much on his expertise to design their ships. I mentioned Bidwell and Banta. They were the they were out of Buffalo, New York. Bidwell and Banta built a lot of the palace steamers of the 1840s and 50s. So those would be the two. There wasn't really one company. It's kind of like, it depends on the era. Like one company kind of dominated in one time, and then a different company sort of dominated at a different time. Whereas Pullman, it was just Pullman all throughout.
So there are cruise ships that go up the East Coast.
Yes.
On the Salties, but they're too big to go into the Great Lakes.
Right. So if you are a salty trying to go into the Great Lakes, the maximum size you could be would be 740 feet. That's the size of the locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway.
And that's small for cruise ships.
And I'm not sure how big modern cruise ships are, but I imagine they're probably longer than that. I mean, the Titanic was, I think, 880 feet long. So the Titanic would not have been able to go to the Great
And
Lakes
that was
if they wanted to.
teeny compared to modern cruise ships.
And I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a good question of how big modern cruise ships are versus the cruise ships of yore. But that'd be interesting to have a cruise ship go from the ocean to the Great Lakes. I think that'd be a very cool trip. Yeah, they just have to be less than 740 feet long, or else they're not making it. They're gonna get stuck right when they get to the St. Lawrence River. Are there any internet questions?
No. Comments.
Okay.
Positive.
What would be a, I have done some ship diving in Asia, but what inlet would you recommend in the United States for ship diving that would be something that would be accessible?
What area?
Yes.
I am not a diver. I have no
There's-
idea. What area would be accessible?
There's in Chicago, there's the wreck of the Silver Spray on Morgan Shoal. It's right off, like, I want to say 31st, maybe a little further south.
If anyone's interested in that, there's a local Chicago radio show called Pocket Guide to Hell, and they have a whole episode about the Silver Spray and bumboats of the time.
Yeah,
Very cool.
but it's a super accessible shipwreck because you can access it from the beach in Chicago. That's a good one.
Yeah, that one's swimming distance. There's a lot of wrecks in general in the Great Lakes. It depends on what you mean exactly by accessible, like if you're willing to go to the
Well, you can
other
dive
ones.
down.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff that is, you can just be open water certified and dive to it.
Nice. Stephanie?
How did the changing of the direction of the river into Chicago, how did that affect like freight and like other ships into the city?
Good question. So the question was, when the Chicago River was reversed with the sanitary ship canal in 1900, how did that affect freight shipping? Not at all, I would think, because the Chicago River, I've kayaked on it many times, is a very slow-moving river, maybe 1 to 2 feet per second. So we're not talking a huge flow here. Chicago was kind of blessed with having a very small change in elevation from the continental divide that exists here, which is why the canal was built. It's only 10 feet. From Lake Michigan up to the summit of the I&M Canal and then back down again at Lockport, it's 10 feet up, 10 feet down. It only required one lock at Bridgeport to get up to the top and then one lock at Lockport to get back down again. So when the sanitary ship canal was dug underneath, or to lower below the level of Lake Michigan to reverse the flow of the river, we're only talking about 10 feet of elevation change here. Very slow-moving river, so I don't think it wasn't much of a factor as far as navigability. Yeah.
All right.
Anything else?
I'm going to steal this from you.
Okay.
I have a question, Walter.
Yes.
Does your partner, Sarah, hate canal tourism as much as my partner does?
So, funny you mention that. So you can actually ride on a canal boat today. If you go to LaSalle, Illinois, which was the terminus of the I&M Canal, they have a canal boat there, pulled by mule. You can ride on it. The mule pulls you about a mile or two down the canal and then back again. It's so cool.
It's so
I
cool.
made Sarah do this.
So cool.
I made Sarah do this last summer, and she's like, I think she appreciated it. I think she enjoyed it, but it was kind of like, why are we doing this? I'm like, look, this was state of the art, okay, in 1848. Because the alternative was a bumpy-ass stagecoach ride pulled by horses. This was like gliding on ice by comparison, and just like lightning fast. So this was LaSalle, Illinois. It's about an hour and a half or so southwest of Chicago.
Is it a mule team or
One mule. His name is Mo Jr. He's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. I was curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, guys, if you're really interested in doing a deep dive on canal history, The first national heritage corridor in the United States is the I&M Canal, Illinois-Michigan Canal. It's the reason we're here, you guys. The reason I fell in love with canals is without the Erie Canal, we wouldn't have Chicago. Anyway, so yeah, I dragged my partner to a lot of different fun Erie Canal historic sites in upstate New York. I wasn't there for a wedding. This was like actual tourism. And anyway,
Awesome.
he had fun, I think. Yeah, anyway, canals are really cool. Shipwrecks are really cool. There's a great lecture last year if you want to learn more about shipwrecks and pirates and such. Sam has a lecture recorded on our website where you can watch more about pirates and shipwrecks for that person who asked the shipwreck question. When it comes to canals and transportation, though, we're your people for sure. Canals forever. Screw rail. Screw trucks.
Yeah, screw trucks.
Team canals. Anyway, thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate your attention and your questions and your excitement about the Edmund Fitzgerald, you nerds. But seriously, thank you guys so much for coming. Again, if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so on our website, chicagoforchicagoans.org/donate. You can also leave a cash donation with Olivia back there, giving a great Vanna White performance in the back. Or we, have all these QR codes scattered around, so if you want to Venmo us or something digital, we can accommodate that as well. We will be back here next week for another great, exciting lecture of a topic. Oh, yes. I remember. Next week, we'll be back to talk about the history of cinema in Chicago. I just found out we are giving a lecture on the history of movie theaters the same night Alamo Drafthouse is opening their Chicago location.
Oh, perfect.
So that's funny. But yeah, very well timed. So come back and learn about cinemas next week. The week after that, I will be talking about farms. Farms, celery, woo, fun stuff. And then, we have a lot more coming up in this series, so make sure you take a little flyer home with you or check out our website. Our events have been selling out really, really fast this year, so what you can actually do is go to our Eventbrite page and hit Remind Me, and as soon as tickets go on sale, it'll send you a little reminder to sign up. Or you can just mark your calendars. Ticket sales always open exactly 2 weeks before the lecture you're trying to go to at 9 a.m. And we do that because people actually come if they sign up 2 weeks in advance. And if people sign up 2 months in advance, they don't come. So apologies for that. But thanks for bearing with us. Again, we would love to see you back. So thank you guys, and give it up for Walter one more time. And of course, give it up for our bartender, Oscar. Woo! You can order more drinks from him. He would love to. All right. Thank you guys so much. Fuck yeah, dude, that was awesome.
Thank you.